So this week in the Sacred Gathering, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do sort of a reflective exercise in which we look at just some basic things from our past and think through how that might affect what God is up to in the things going on in our life right now. The idea for this exercise came to me when I looked at our reading. We're doing the from First Samuel. We're doing the beginning of the David and Goliath story, and I think in it David says something very interesting, something that's been very foundational for way of thinking for me personally. So what we'll do is we'll read this thing together. We'll talk about it a little bit, just like I'm doing in this recording. And then we'll break up into small groups, and people will be given the opportunity, not the requirement, but the opportunity to reflect on and share some of the ways God has worked in their past, and what are some of the challenges in which we are facing now. So for this recording, I'll kind of do the same thing. I'll do the reading, and then I'll kind of give my few thoughts on it, and then I guess just as kind of an example, I will answer those questions myself, and I'm looking forward to hearing what people have to say on Sunday in their smaller groups. So let me start out by reading from First Samuel. Again, it's a long, kind of sprawling story. So for the lectionary reading, they've kind of chopped it into pieces to make it a little easier. But as always, when we're removing verses, I just want us to be aware that that is going on. That this isn't the only way to tell the story by any means. So in First Samuel chapter 17, we read. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. They were gathered at Succoth, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Succoth and Azekah, which in Aphares Demanim, whatever. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head. He was armed in a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He had greaves of bronze on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves. Let him come down to me. If he is able to fight me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting the Philistines. David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper, and took the provisions, and went as Jesse his father had commanded him. He came to the encampment of the army that was going forth to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. David left the things in charge of the keeper of baggage, ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistine and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." But Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. You're just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord, who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David in his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor. He tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk in these, for I am not used to them." So David removed them. He then took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag, in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David, with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and of the air and the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you unto my hand. I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell down, face on the ground. So this iconic story has one thing I really wanted to point out, and that's David's attitude, right? David is not an impressive warrior. He's not someone anyone's going to be impressed by. I mean, his past as a shepherd is, I think, fairly impressive, but he's not a trained warrior. He's not one you would expect, but he recognizes something when he's in this opportunity, when he is in this moment to face down something that is just terrifying and clearly beyond his power. And that is, God has rescued him in the past from places in which he did not have enough. No normal person, I think, can fight off lions and bears, let alone multiple ones, right? Unless he is trusting in God and God is giving him the ability to fight off these dangers. And he recognizes in the ways God has moved in the past an opportunity to see God is still working in the present. And this idea of, you know, God gave me a foundation and a way of trusting him, which I can apply to even the present, is I think one of the major takeaways and what inspired this kind of reflective exercise that we're doing together on Sunday. And so the first question is, what have been some of the lions and bears in your past? Difficulties or adversities in which God has worked out to your salvation or benefit? And what did you learn about God from these experiences? So, by way of example, I will start by answering these questions. I think the first two that pop into my head is I think most people who will be listening to this will know that I was in my mid 20s. I was diagnosed as bipolar. I'm someone who, for most of my adult life, has struggled with both depression and often manic rage. And there have been many times when I got to some very low places, and yet God continued to provide help for me. Sometimes it was just in one-on-one conversations when I felt like everyone else had abandoned me. Sometimes it was through friends and family being willing to sit with me in those dark places, and I think God was strengthening them. I think it was just the entire process, and to this point, I still experience many of those feelings. I still have my lows, I still have my highs, and yet that is a place that I have always met God. God has met me in those things. Those things have not overwhelmed me and overcome me, which has not been the case of, I know, many people who've experienced those things. And those dark, painful, despair-ridden places have always been a place that God has met me and strengthened me and kind of carried me through some of those darknesses in my own kind of difficult interior life at times. And I think that it has shown me a willingness on God's part to enter into our pain, enter into those places that make most of us uncomfortable, even when we find them within ourselves. And at this point in my life, I think I can say confidently that I just know things about God. I know things about who God is and the sorts of places that God can thrive and bring good things out of that from the outside are always going to be seen as darkness and miserable, and that's what they are, unless of course God's presence is in those places of darkness. So I think my own mental illness and struggles with that is very much one of those lions and bears for me. Something that could have overwhelmed me and was beyond my strength, and yet something that God has been with me, and I trust, whether it's dark times coming from my own interior life or from external circumstances, I just trust God in a way I don't think I could if I had not experienced that, and if God had not been with me through from pretty tough interior stuff um, with me. I think the other one I think of is again an incident many people will be aware of, that several years ago we at our old house had a freak kind of a freak weather incident in which our house, which apparently was built on an old riverbed, and then some hail came, it clogged up the old storm drains, and this wave of water flooded and destroyed our house, taking most of our possessions with us. And at the time, obviously, it was very traumatic. It was very scary having my children were napping in the basement at the time. And yet, as we begin reflecting on it, as we begin thinking on it, we look back and realize there was this kind of series of small coincidences. That Holly was home to wake me from my nap, that I was able to get down there, that in the end, no real harm was done. My children were okay. We lost a lot of stuff. We felt totally overwhelmed, and people heard about it and they saw just how dramatic it was, and people rallied around us, providing food, providing shelter for us, providing volunteer hours. Eventually, when we were not helped out by many of the systems we expected, whether that's a government organization like FEMA or our own insurance we've been paying to, when all of those other things failed us, God was there. God provided in some surprising ways, in some backdoor ways, and even though there was a long time when we were just afraid, the world felt unsafe. It felt like something awful could happen on a totally normal day, like it did that time. Over time, it has grown into us a recognition that God can be with us in really difficult times that were in our interior of our lives, and He can be with us in really difficult circumstances of tragedies as well. And again, it could have been so much worse, and yet I've I've lived through some experiences that many people fear. They think something bad is going to happen to them. I've been through some of those experiences, not all of them by any means, and yet in both of those situations, God has been there. God has helped us with our physical needs. God has helped me with my mental and spiritual needs. And so for me, these bears, these lions in my past just put me in a place of trust that I don't have to be afraid. I don't know what's coming. I have no doubt there are many challenges ahead of me, but I just don't feel like I have to be afraid, even if something like Goliath shows up. And I just think God has done fine in my past with those lions and bears, and at this point in my life, trust He will be there in the future as well. Our next question is kind of, what are some of the giants in your current life? Difficulties, adversities you're currently needing God's intervention or guidance for? How can our trust of God in our current circumstances be reinforced by our remembering His past faithful actions? So first, I just want to start off by saying, compared to some of the places I've been, I'm in a pretty good place right now. Most of the giants for me have to do with the unknown. It feels like as I am finishing up my doctoral program with Fuller, as I'm considering other opportunities, other relationship roles, my work has always been kind of a hodgepodge of multiple part-time jobs, and I've just got a lot up in the air right now. I feel like there's a lot up in the air with my family, with my children, switching schools and going into new programs and those sorts of things. And so, compared to many of the places I've been, those do not feel like the giants. They don't feel like those lions and bears, but there's a lot of unknown. I do feel like I carry around a lot of stress that I just wish I knew where these things were going to go, that these things were going to click into place, that just the anxiety that my life, my work, these things will mean something, that God will bring some fruitfulness and some helpfulness to the overall world and its pain. And so I can say with confidence, if God can handle things like a flood or, a fairly debilitating at times mental illness, I trust He's going to work in the midst of some of this just kind of confusion that I have right now, this waiting and this anxiety about roles and work and how things are going to turn out with my children, that sort of thing. So that's kind of, I think, for me, the reflection. That's what I'm hoping we're doing, and we'll end our time simply praying over one another, simply saying thank you for the places that God has shown up and worked for us, and saying, God, we need you to intervene, because I know there are a lot of folks in our community right now dealing with much more difficult circumstances than I am right now. And so, yeah, we go in to bear these things with one another, but we go in to remind ourselves that God has been good in many of our lives, and we trust no matter what comes down, no matter what a giant shouts at us, that God will continue to be good, that He will continue to be trustworthy, He will continue to bring good out of these hard and dark times. And that is what our prayers are this week. That is what this story and everything else is meant to remind us.